I wasn't prepared for what was going to happen when I decided to move to that small town. It wasn't an easy choice, but after I lost my husband, staying in that big empty house became impossible. Every room held a memory of him. Every object reminded me of what we had built together during 40 years of marriage. The kids already had their own lives, their own families, and lived in another country, and I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. So I sold the house, packed my bags, and started over in a place where nobody knew me, where I could try to build a new routine without being reminded every moment of my loss. The first days were difficult. I'd wake up not quite sure where I was, walk through the streets finding everything strange, every corner, every different sound. The loneliness weighed on me in a way I had never felt before. But I had to move forward. It was either that or let myself sink completely into sadness. It was on one of those afternoons, when I decided it didn't make sense to cook just for myself, that I found a small, cozy restaurant in the center of town. The place was simple, with that homey smell of food made with love, and I decided to go in. I sat at a table near the window and was watching the street traffic when a young man came to serve me. He must have been in his early 20s, dark-haired, polite smile, kind eyes. He greeted me with that natural friendliness some people have, and while he was taking my order, something caught my attention. When he raised his arm to write in his notepad, I saw a birthmark on his forearm. It was a dark, irregular spot with a very specific shape. My entire body shuddered. That mark was identical to the one my husband had in the same place, exactly the same. I tried to hide it, but my gaze stayed fixed on that arm longer than it should have. The young man noticed and quickly lowered his arm, perhaps embarrassed, perhaps thinking I was being rude. I forced a smile and said everything was fine, that he could bring what I had ordered. He left and I sat there, thinking about what I had just seen. I know birthmarks aren't unique, that many people can have similar spots, but that one was so identical, it disturbed me. It was as if my husband was there somehow, in that unknown young man. I ate my meal without tasting anything. I kept thinking about that strange coincidence, about that inexplicable feeling that came over me. When I paid the bill, the young man came back to thank me, and I froze, not knowing what to say. I wanted to ask about the mark, but how could I do that without seeming completely crazy? So I just smiled back and left, but something inside me knew I would return. In the following days, I couldn't get it out of my head. I thought about that young man, about the mark, about the strange sensation that had invaded me. And so I started going back to the restaurant, always at the same time, always sitting at the same table. At first, he just greeted me politely, took my order, and brought the food. But over time, we started exchanging a few words. I'd ask how his day was going. He'd ask if I was enjoying the city. Simple conversations, nothing major, but gradually they created a closeness. As the weeks went by, those quick conversations turned into a genuine friendship. I discovered his name was Edward, and he had worked at that restaurant since he was 16. He was a hard-working young man, polite, always willing to help anyone who came in. He told me he lived alone in a small apartment near downtown and was saving money to go to college for physical therapy. One day, after almost 2 months of frequenting the restaurant, I finally had the courage to talk about it. Edward had just brought my coffee and was about to leave when I lightly held his arm. He stopped, looked at me with that gentle way he had, and I thought for a few seconds before speaking. I said I had noticed his birthmark since the first day, and that it was exactly like the one my late husband had. I explained that during 40 years of marriage, I had looked at that mark every day, and that seeing the same thing on his arm had completely shaken me. Edward was silent for a moment. Then he pulled up a chair and sat across from me, and what he told me at that moment changed everything. He said he had been adopted as a baby, that he never knew his biological parents, and that he grew up with a loving family who had always been honest about the adoption. But he had never looked into where he came from, had never felt the need to, until now. The way he looked at me in that instant was different, as if he was seeing something in me he had never noticed before. I left the restaurant that day with my head exploding with thoughts. I got home and sat on the couch, trying to organize everything I was feeling. Edward's age matched. He was 23, and if he were alive, my baby would be exactly the same age. Because yes, I had a baby who didn't survive, or at least that's what they told me. It was so long ago, but the pain of that loss never completely left me. I was young, only 39, and pregnant for the third time. My husband and I already had 2 children, but we wanted one more. The pregnancy was smooth, without complications, and when the day of delivery came, we went to the maternity hospital full of hope, but something went wrong. Or at least that's what they told me. After I gave birth, I was unconscious for a few hours. When I woke up, the nurse came into the room and told me my baby hadn't made it. They said he was born with severe respiratory problems, and they couldn't save him. My husband was devastated, I was shattered, but back then you believed what the doctors said. You didn't question, didn't demand explanations. You just accepted and suffered in silence. For years I carried that pain stored inside me. I raised my other 2 children, went on with my life, but there was always a void that was never filled. My husband also never completely got over it, and sometimes, on quiet nights, we would talk about that child we lost, imagining what he would be like if he had survived. And now, decades later, I was there, sitting in my living room, thinking about the impossible. What if that baby hadn't died? What if Edward was him? I spent the entire night without sleeping, turning over every detail in my head. The next morning, I went back to the restaurant. Edward was there, and when he saw me come in, he came to my table with an anxious look. He sat across from me, and we stayed there in silence until I finally said what I was thinking. I told him about the baby I lost, about the birth date that coincided with his age, about the suspicion that was growing inside me. I proposed we do a DNA test, that we find out the truth once and for all. He agreed quickly. The days that followed until we got the results were the longest of my life. I could barely eat, could barely think about anything else. Edward also seemed anxious, called me every day to see if I was okay, if I needed anything. When the day finally came to get the results, we went to the lab together. We sat side by side in the waiting room, and I held his hand tightly, as if I already knew what was coming. When they called our name and handed us the envelope, my hands were shaking so much I asked Edward to open it. He read it silently and then looked at me with eyes full of tears. It was positive. Edward was my son. That baby I had mourned for 23 years was alive, was right there in front of me. I hugged him so hard I thought I might faint, and he hugged me back, crying with me. But along with the joy came a rage that took over every part of my being. Because this meant someone had lied to me. Someone had taken my son from my arms and made me believe he was dead. We started investigating. Edward gave me all the adoption documents, and I looked for the records from the maternity hospital where he was born. That's when we discovered the darkest and most painful truth. It had been intentional. A nurse at that maternity hospital was involved in a baby-selling scheme. I don't want to give details about how they switched the babies, but the newborns were then sold to families who paid for illegal adoptions. My son was one of the victims of this monstrous scheme. I was one of the deceived, destroyed mothers who spent their entire lives carrying a pain that should never have existed. When I understood what had happened, I felt a sadness so intense I thought I would go crazy. I had found my son, but at the same time, I discovered they had stolen him from me on purpose, that they had made me suffer intentionally. All those nights I spent crying, all the times I looked at my other children and thought about what was missing, all my husband's suffering who died without knowing our son was alive, all of this was caused by greed, by evil. We decided to report it. We took everything to the police, all the documents, all the evidence we could gather. The investigation revealed the scheme had affected dozens of families over the years. Some of the people involved had already died. Others were arrested. The nurse responsible for my case was alive and was convicted, but no punishment would be enough to erase what she had done. No sentence could give me back the years I lost with my son, the moments I never lived, the memories I never built. But in the middle of all this pain and rage, something bigger was happening. I had my son back. Edward started visiting me every day, and gradually we built the relationship that was stolen from us. I introduced him to his siblings, who were surprised and at the same time moved to discover they had another brother. The family that adopted Edward had been deceived too. They didn't know the adoption was illegal, and when they found out they were devastated. But they were good people who raised my son with love, and for that I will always be grateful to them. Edward started calling me Mom a few months later. The first time I heard that word come out of his mouth, I cried with emotion. It was a strange and wonderful feeling at the same time, because I had been his mother since the day he was born, but only now could I truly live it. He told me about his childhood, about his adoptive parents, about the dreams he had. I told him about his biological father, about how he was a good and honest man, about the birthmark they shared, and which, in the end, was what brought us back to each other. Today, when I look back, I see how life is full of impossible twists. I moved to that town trying to escape loneliness, trying to start over after losing my husband, and I ended up finding the son I thought I had lost more than 2 decades ago. Sometimes I wonder if it was fate, if it was my husband from somewhere guiding me there, or if it was just an absurd coincidence. I don't know the answer, and maybe I never will. But I know that every trip to that restaurant, every conversation with Edward, every detail that led me to the truth was worth it. The pain of knowing I was deceived, that they stole precious years with my son from me, will never completely disappear. There are nights when I lie thinking about everything we lost, about everything that could have been different. I think about my husband, who died without knowing our son was alive, and it breaks me. But then I look at Edward. I see the incredible man he became despite everything, and I feel immense gratitude for having the chance to be by his side now. I can't change the past. I can't recover the lost time, but I can live in the present and build a future alongside him. If there's something I learned from all this, it's that we should never give up searching for the truth, no matter how painful it may be, and that a mother's love, even when interrupted, stolen, and hidden for years, always finds a way to resurface. That birthmark, which for so long reminded me of the man I loved, ended up being the sign that led me back to the son I thought I had lost. And as much as the path was full of pain and injustice, I'm here now, being a mother, living what was denied to me, and that's all that matters.